Yep. There, is that okay, Demir?
Yeah. Hello.
Okay.
We're good to go. Well, welcome to our presentation today. It's my pleasure to introduce Karen Thomas, who I've known as well, and she's based at Selkirk Mental Health Centre in Selkirk. And just by way of introduction of our speaker, she has a master's in social work from Dalhousie University, and she has worked in the rehabilitation for people in this field for past 30 years. And she specialized in working with survivors of ABI, both in the public and private sectors. All I can say is that in the time that I've known Karen, I can only characterize as someone being dedicated, committed, passionate, hardworking, and all the superlative adjectives that you can find, they apply to our speaker. With that, I present Karen Thomas.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much for coming, those of you who are present. Hello, how are you? I see some people that I recognize. This is wonderful. And hello to those of you in streaming land. I've never done a live webcast before, so I apologize if something isn't too clear, but I'll do my very best. So when I was asked to do this presentation, I had been harassing Reg Urbanowski to get involved with us. I even ran into him on a plane one time, and I said, we got to get together. So finally, just to sort of keep me settled, he said, why don't you come and do an Illuminate presentation about what you do out there? I said, that sounds like a great idea. So it's my pleasure to be here. I've been in the trenches for a long time, so I don't necessarily get involved in research, etc. But I've only got a few years left to retirement. I know I look young, but I only got a few years to go. And I want to take what we've learned in the last 20 years at least, and try to start working with a network. So my ulterior motive is to develop community. And that's what my master's is actually in, community development. Okay. So today we're going to talk about a little introduction, history and experience at the Selkirk Mental Health Centre Acquired Brain Injury Program. The 3 R's, not reading, writing, arithmetic. And now what? Okay. I'd also like to thank Carmen, who's my social work partner in Selkirk, for clicking. So a lot of people don't know about our program. It is, in fact, some of our OTs that work there say they never even heard about us when they were in school. We've been open for 11 years, actually, started taking new admissions 10 years ago. Our target is moderate to severe acquired brain injury, a population that has traditionally languished in hospital for a very long time or gone straight to personal care homes as young people. Everybody disagrees with that strategy. You may live for 40 more years. It's very, very discouraging for those folks. So this program was modeled after the Halford Johnson program in Ponoka, Alberta. And the length of stay, our average length of stay is a year. So is theirs, actually. We have a 20-bed inpatient unit in this Tyndall building, and I encourage you all to come visit us. And we have a 5-bed transitional residence. And the manager of our transitional residence is actually here today, which I really appreciate. And another one of our OTs, Nicole, that's Lindsay and Nicole, and they're going to be available to ask questions at the end of this. Thank you so much for coming. Okay. So I'm a social worker, but I've worked in hospital rehab for a long time. In 2008, when we first opened, I was told by a mother, I know why they wish you good luck when you leave the rehab hospital, because that's all there is. At the end of today's presentation, I'd like to let you know that there is some other things, but she was kind of right, and those services haven't really changed enough. Okay. So the good news is the majority of acquired brain injuries are mild. That is often there's different estimates between 75% to 90% are mild. Glasgow Coma scale, 14-15, definitely have effects from that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't go back to work. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can never go home. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have profound impacts on your life. So that's the good news. The other good news is a variety of short-term inpatient rehab programs, and many of you are familiar with those. Excellent programs at Riverview and at the post-acute neurosurgery unit. There's some various regional rehabilitation, non-specific programs, Beausejour, Rivers, Brandon, throughout the province. Not necessarily specifically for brain injury, but out there. And our program was set up in 2008. So what have we learned? Moderate and severe brain injuries, Glasgow Coma Scale between 3 and 12, profoundly affect individuals and their families. I don't have to tell you this. Everyone who is watching this is here because they know that already. And there are no regularly publicly funded programs in Manitoba for this population that will last lifelong. And again, everyone knows that. There's a few smatterings of things throughout. Sometimes you can wedge in something somewhere if you kick and fuss enough, but generally there's no regularly publicly funded program, and there is, to my knowledge, no provincial strategy. So who do we serve? Ages 18 to 64, non-progressive conditions. So primarily we look at today, I'm Karen 1.0, something happens. Tomorrow, I'm Karen 2.0. And my task now is to try and regain what I had and move forward with what I've got. Injuries acquired as adults, of course. And we've had to, classification of brain injury is tough. So we followed the Halvard Johnson article by Sean Gray, who was the director. He did an article in 2000, I don't have any more recent stuff than that, where he divided it, the same as the literature, into traumatic and non-traumatic. But for the purposes of rehabilitation, we then further subdivide our non-traumatic into vascular and anoxia and toxic exposure, and we'll talk a minute about that later. And the other one is they need more time. Riverview has a length of stay target of 49 days because they are moving people through quickly. And everyone knows what the problem is in healthcare right now. We've got to keep moving. So they often discharge to us. We also receive discharges from across the province. Somebody's at Health Sciences, goes out to Dauphin, and then sent back to us when we have an open bed. So those paths of referral are not clear. They're not organized, and sometimes people miss valuable rehabilitation time. So we would like you to all know that we exist. Tell your friends. Make certain that people get access for the services that we have. All right, quick note on traumatic brain injury. At Halvard Johnson, they had 60% trauma. We only have 29% trauma. Anybody know why that is? Less guns, good guess. No, it's called Manitoba Public Insurance. 2/3 of all moderate to severe brain injuries occur as a result of a car accident. 2/3. Here in Manitoba, we have a marvelous personal injury protection plan. And you don't hear people singing the praises of MPI, but I sure do. And they also have a catastrophic injury coverage. And folks here from March of Dimes from Ontario, it's very different in Ontario, isn't it? They're nodding their heads. Private car insurance is tough. I worked 7 years in the private insurance industry, doing complex discharge from hospital with MPI, WCB, and sometimes home care, believe it or not. But nevertheless, it's a very different landscape. Lots of money is put into lawyers' fees. Lots of money is put into rehab people to do assessments. But then it's very hard to get things done. Here in Manitoba, they get things done right away. You can't sue, so the money doesn't go to the lawyers. I'm sorry, lawyers. If there's any of you watching, I apologize. But it goes directly to rehab. That's the theory. So that's been wonderful. So if you can get rehabilitation, OT-PT speech in your own home, or would you like to come to us for a year? Where would you go? Your own home, because we all know that the best place to do rehab is in a familiar environment. So if you can do it, do it. We've only had, I think, 8 or 9 MPI survivors through our program of 122 who've been discharged. in the last 10 years. That doesn't sound like very many, because it isn't, because I'm sure there's lots more out there. Okay, so that's the primary one, but we see a lot of assaults and lots of unknowns. Fell down the stairs, assaulted, we're not sure. We see victims of crime stuff. We've seen prison assaults. We've seen gunshot wounds. Those are sort of the really aggressive ones. We've also just seen the plain old fell out of a tree kind of thing. We've seen lightning strike. So 29% of our folks, we have lots of good experience with that. And of course, some sports injuries, and those are very serious ones. Football, snowboarding, things like that. Okay. So NTBI is a bit of a surprise. We expected to have it similar to Halver Johnson when we opened. Not a chance because of MPI, and so glad for it. But what we do have is a lot of young stroke. Interestingly enough, anyone of Filipino descent needs to spread the message. The Filipino community has a much higher rate of stroke than their population would indicate. First Nations also have a higher rate of stroke. But the biggest referral source we get are 50-year-old men, often had been drinking alcohol issues, often divorced, separated. It's surprising that the demographic is so big, 45, 50, 55-year-old. And there's lots to be said around just how our society moves along when we're growing older. But the younger and younger strokes are a huge growth area we did not expect. So the other area that has been a surprise has been the non-traumatic brain injury due to other causes, primarily anoxia. Now anoxia, I guess I'm probably preaching to the choir, you all know, 4 to 6 minutes it takes for brain death, cell death in the brain without oxygen. Young people can last longer than old people. If I was down for 10 minutes, I'm not coming back. But we've seen many young people who've had, as a result of a drug misadventure or a purposeful overdose or attempted suicide, strangulation, or sometimes attack where they have bled out, and there's many reasons to have anoxia. And vasculitis, cocaine-induced vasculitis. These injuries are very different than the traumas. They tend to have much more flat affect, tend to be very slow to recover, and yet they do make gains over a long period of time. There's some pretty exciting stuff out there. We'd love to have more research on it. Okay, so I presented to my team yesterday. They said, everyone will want to know, well, what does this really look like? Who is our population? I have this fancy slide up here with a lot of stuff stuffed in here. But primarily folks who come to us in a nutshell are folks who a hospital could not safely discharge. That's it. Because of requirement of supervision, where if they left the hospital, they would be lost and not find their way back. Maybe they cannot walk and talk, and their family cannot manage their care. Maybe they have difficulty with behaviors, social relations. Anything your brain does can be damaged, of course. So that means brain injury is so varied, and one of the difficulties in designing services for it is that so many things can go wrong. But with, of course, neuroplasticity being really sort of the catchword of the last 20 years, we're all still very hopeful that we continue to make gains. And we do. So I'm going to talk about that, which I suspect is why you're here. Okay, so I'm a social worker. Rehab people talk about rehab, talk about getting better. They talk about this. And then they get to the point where, well, we're done. You can discharge now. And I'm like, okay, have you got a room in your basement? You know, maybe they can come live with you. And I'm like, ha, 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 ha. Well, that's not so funny, is it? If it's you, where am I going to go? I can't walk, my house is not accessible. I can't afford to get it renovated. Maybe my husband will be with me, maybe he won't be. Maybe I'm young and I have no insurance, I have no money. If I was hurt in a car accident, say, hey, that's awesome. I always say to my husband, look, if I fall off the roof today when we're shingling, quick, smash up the car and put me in it. Don't make it worse. I mean, smash up the car first, then put me in it and put a claim into MPI, please. Or tell them I was working. Maybe I get WCB. Because that's all there is in Manitoba for those kinds of services that people desperately, desperately need. So that's the first part. I want to get better. But most of our folks don't get better. They have a new life, and that's a huge change. The secondary effects are far more profound than the primary effects. The fact that I can't use my hand is bad. The fact that I can't walk is bad. But it's much worse that I can't go home. It's much worse that I've lost my job and I may have a very limited income. It's much worse that I'm angry all the time or I'm aggressive. It's much worse that my family is burdened with my care. And those are the things our patients worry about and their families. Of course, they always say, I want to walk. Of course they do. And that's very handy to walk. It makes life a lot easier, doesn't it? But these are the issues that I like to talk about, because when rehab is done, what now? Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of data. Reg said don't do too much data, so I tried to consolidate it, but I'm a bit of a data hound. So what time are we at here? Okay. I've got this all timed out. I don't want to waste anybody's time here, so I want you to have opportunity to talk to our OTs. Our history and experience to date. We have 10 inpatients bed opened in 2008. They were mainly for grandfathered folks, people who'd been in our center for average length of stay of 12 years. In the good old days, when if somebody had a severe brain injury, they didn't know what to do, they would send them to Selkirk and use mental health care, what we knew at the time to be the best thing we could do, and generally with pretty disastrous results, in spite of good intentions. In January 2009, we started taking new admissions, and we opened up our 5-bed transitional residence, which is really a jewel in our program. And 2010, we opened 10 more inpatient beds. So where are we now? We've had 145 new admissions since 2009. We've served a total of 158 people, and what we've gained is a lot of experience. Average length of stay for new admissions is 1 year. Imagine that, which is similar to Halver Johnson. It's not because they're necessarily better. Sometimes they stay longer because there's no place to go. That is a reality we deal with. Okay. So where are they from? Lots of people say, oh, everybody goes in these programs and they go straight to Winnipeg, but that has not been our experience. We are a provincial program. About 50% of our folks come from non-Winnipeg sites. Where do they go after they leave? This is a fancy data. I don't want to spend too much time on it. But yes, lots go back to Winnipeg. But only, actually, in real numbers, 69 go to Winnipeg. 65 came from Winnipeg. So it's not a huge surprise. It's not surprising to people who think often the other way around. Many folks actually want to go home. So our target is to get people home because that's where they want to be. If you're from St. Pierre, you want to go to St. Pierre. If you're from Thompson, you want to go to Thompson because family is the most important thing. I'd say 100% of the time. If people don't have family, it's really tough. But the majority of our folks do have some family. We work very hard to keep them engaged. Okay. This is a bunch of numbers. Not everybody likes numbers. But the key here is the age. Right here. You already know we have less TBI than we expected. These are significantly impaired individuals. Average age at admission is 38. They may live for 30 more years. That's the average age. We've had young as 18. Can't just send them to a nursing home or a personal care home at that age. In fact, if we do to Winnipeg, they won't even accept the referral because they can't. Some of the rural areas are a little bit different. They have more flexibility because that's the community, that's where their families live. But generally, personal care homes have taken the brunt of discharges for moderate to severe brain injury for a long time. And they do their very best, but they were not designed for a young population. Everybody knows that. It takes a long time for them to leave. Anybody know why? Anybody guess? It's a quiet group. Behavior, lack of resources. They didn't have a house maybe. They didn't have a place to live before. And their parents may be too old to care for them. If you're very young, you go home and live with your parents until that breaks down, or your parents pass away, or are not able to care for you. But our population, that is more rare because parents cannot take these individuals on. They just cannot do it physically. So about 1.5 years it takes. And where do they go? I'll do that in a minute. The other thing of note is we have far more vascular injuries than we expected. We're very excited to hear that stroke is starting to really ramp up, and the announcement about the stroke unit. I know it's not a rehab unit, but necessarily it's going to develop a network of services for stroke that might take a little bit of relief for young people having strokes. But a lower length of stay because they have insurance, because they had a house. Often they have a spouse, they have a place to go to, and if they're older, they can access the services for older Manitobans. Assisted living, 55 plus, those kinds of things. It's much easier. And they tend not to have kind of the aggressive behaviors that sometimes we see in TBI. A little more cognitively aware. And the NTBI other 35, and this is the area that we're most concerned about. Prevention, prevention, prevention. The meth crisis, the cocaine-induced vasculitis. This population suffers, and it's almost all male. Well, most of our program, I didn't even actually talk about gender, but the vast majority are male. So any effort to try and prevent brain injury from overdose needs to be really, really well funded and well thought out, because these guys suffer terribly. So, and they take about 1 year to get out. So where do they go? Let's carry on. A note on the 3 R's of our program. It was a tagline on our letterhead for a long time for Selkirk Mental Health Centre. And our ABI program really glommed onto it. Recovery, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Rehab is only a moment in a person's life. Reintegration is the rest of their lives. We spend a lot of money on rehab. We spend a lot of money on medical care. And our system spends very little on reintegration. And yet, as I noted before, that is the one that people are the most concerned about. Healthcare doesn't have a lot of control over that. It doesn't control who the individual is, does not control their family, cannot control what the community can or cannot provide. Healthcare has made some attempts at providing services for longer term, but it's always very unstably funded because there is no legislation requiring any reintegration. Unlike community living, people who are injured or intellectually disabled before the age of 18 and have an IQ of less than 70, there is stable funding sources. If you're unlucky enough to be injured at the age of 18 and 1 day, even if your IQ is less than 70, even if you have the same function as a person with intellectual disability, there is no service except for health care, which means personal care home, home care, and hospital. Outpatient rehab, we know we struggle with that too. So the system is a huge question mark, and it's inconsistently applied across the province. And I know that with our new efforts in health, we're trying to make things accessible and universal and consistent. It's a big job. The only really good news is with moderate to severe brain injury, it's a small n. And we have lots of experience. We know lots of people involved in this because it takes a lot more than just one little program to help people with these injuries. And we have new partners. So I have just divided this recovery. There's lots of stuff around medicine and nursing, and they do some fantastic work in our program. And they're a big partner with our rehab, and they integrate back and forth. And then the reintegration, of course, that social works thing, just get them out of here, it doesn't matter where they go. Nobody ever says that to me where I work, thank goodness. But I certainly have been the recipient of those comments, as I'm sure you all have, with the harried charge nurse who goes, I have 6 people in the hallway waiting. It doesn't matter to me where they go, just go. It's a crisis in our system. So, next. Rehabilitation results that we have. And this is the stuff that you guys study, which is really awesome. And if you look at this, I just recently picked this up at the library, at the bookstore, because there's an article by a guy I wanted to read. And you know how much of this book is dedicated to reintegration? 6 pages. I'm not kidding. I've researched all the articles on reintegration for community, and they all say the same thing that I'm saying. We wring our hands. Isn't it terrible? Isn't it terrible? They need supports. Family needs supports. The good news is we've got some plans. So rehab, we get really excited about all these things that we're able to do. Still doesn't get them out. Doesn't get them home. Next. When medical rehabilitation ends, which is really the topic of this conversation, family members dread the term rehabilitation plateau. They dread it. You guys know that term, right? It doesn't mean that the individual will never make any more gains for the rest of their lives. We know that now. It used to be thought that once it was done, but we know that's not the case. It may mean that some funding and programs will be ended. So what's next? Okay. So let's look at real evidence. Where do people actually go from our program? This is a really complicated chart, and I'll tease it out a little bit more. Got a couple minutes left. 51% go home with family, 51 people go home with family, 37 go home independent. And they go, you know, if a person's doing a regular discharge from a regular hospital, that's terrific, that's exactly right. But every single one of these is complicated and takes an enormous amount of effort and teamwork, which we do between our nursing rehab family. We do training, families come in, we work with home care, we work with all the discharge sites to try and make it as successful as possible. We've only ever had one person from community come back, and all the ones we've sent out, believe it or not, which we're quite proud of. But I hear from those folks all the time. The other ones go through a smattering of various, as you can see, 1, 2 ends of very, very low ends. So every single one of these takes an enormous amount of effort to go. And of all of these, I would say probably 75% previously would have gone to a PCH. So we are also very proud of that. But there are some issues. Okay. So when we talk about housing, people say, oh, crisis ABI, it's all about housing. Well, it's not really about housing. It's about life. It's about the supports that you have. It's about your family. It's about your job. It's about income. But I can't really report on that. That's too much research. I do not have a capacity to look at each case and design exactly where the problems are. So we take a shortcut and we look at where'd they go. So we're going to do that. So if we look at the number of 122 discharges over 10 years, 33 go to the same home, 12 go to the same home with major renovations, sometimes 30,000, sometimes 100,000. 77 go to a completely different home. Now, if I was injured tomorrow and someone said, Karen, you're not going home again, the consequence of that, you're going to have some major grief to deal with. And so we see a lot of that in our program, as well as other people see in their program. Earlier on, there's still lots of hope that I'm going to be who I was. But once they come to us, they know they're not going to be who they were. And we have to start the second chance routine. You have to start, what are you going to do with your life now? Okay, so just to drill down this a bit, the people who go to the same home as where they came from, the family is the main support. Most often, a spouse or a parent. Most often. Usually, no services. You've even had some leave AMA because they're in the program. They go, I don't want to be here, and they leave. That's only happened 3 or 4 times in 10 years, which speaks to the integrity of that, of who comes and the services they need and what their options are. We often hear from them after discharge. Wow, I misspelled that. Well, I hear from them. I'm the social worker. Carmen, over there on the, who's doing the clicking, she's the social worker in our program. We hear from our discharge clients all the time. They say, where do I go? Who do I call? What can I do? I've been, I need help with any myriad of things that might occur. And we de facto become a resource referral agency. It's not really our mandate, but we do. 12 of them went to the same home with Renovations. And everybody goes, well, isn't there a public program that will help pay for that? There used to be, but you had it, your home couldn't be worth more than $120,000. And your income had to be less than $60,000 combined family income. So I had 2 people eligible for that program in 10 years. Maximum of $16,000. So it's not that easy to get, and now that program has been closed. So If you're under Victims of Crime or MPI, that is very helpful for renovations. Private disability benefits, you can get that, but you have to appeal the heck out of it because their first answer will always be no. For any of the social workers out there, appeal, appeal, appeal. Do it every time. You'll win, but you have to be. It might take 8 months to get the money. That takes a long time. Most hospitals can't keep somebody for 8 months just because they can't get money to renovate their house. Community fundraising and charity we've used. And people, of course, use personal money. That takes time. Sometimes renovations take up to 6 months to a year, depending on the need. Okay, new home and community. This is the population that the mother said, I know why they wish you luck after you leave the hospital, because that's all there is. So, if my son was injured tomorrow, I would take him home. He's only 24. What services would I have? Home care. That's it. That's all. And home care has done yeoman's duty trying to provide those services. And community therapy services will come in and do an assessment and then make recommendations. But that system was not designed for this population. So when a home care case coordinator, which I was for a year, gets a brain injury situation across their desk, they're like, oh boy, this one's going to take me 50% of my caseload time. I see somebody nodding out there. I think the home care folks will recognize that's the truth. They see us coming. Hi, my name's Karen. They're going, oh, great. She's phoning. Wow. But at the same time, we've developed networks for some home care case coordinators that are pretty phenomenal people out there. And they care a lot, but they struggle. So some go to a wheelchair accessible apartment. That takes time to find. We have a very shortage of that. Some go to private apartments. Some go to Manitoba housing. Right now, we have a 2-year wait list sometimes, 1 year, 2 years to get into Manitoba housing. And remember, your income's affected. So maybe that's all you can afford. And the other area is assisted living. There's some assisted living programs that accepted our folks, if they have the money, who are under age 55. And we've had 3 successfully go to assisted living. It's actually pretty good. I wish they had more assisted living options for people who are younger. So half of all of these folks have home care. A handful have mental health, proctor services under, because they are not competent to manage their affairs, an order of supervision, committeeship's been done, so they get some mental health. But again, it's a smattering, and it's not really the mental health workers. When I phone them, they go, oh, hi. Hi, Karen. Yeah, I thought you were going to call about that one. Oh. But they do their very best. And they often will say, I don't know anything about brain injury. It's not an Axis 1 diagnosis. It's not what they do. But they try anyway. And of course, rehabilitation is often very isolated. Rehabilitation is finished. That's what that means. And people are very often isolated in their own homes. Sometimes they pass away. No one there. Sometimes families despair and call their MLA in desperation. It's a really difficult time. Okay. Specialty programs. This is the one that I would say the majority of people who come to our program will say, well, I'd like him to go to a group home. Like, okay. And so all our team are laughing a bit because they know, they say, don't tell Karen you're going to send him to a group home, because there aren't any group homes funded for people with brain injury in this province. There is one group home that MPI set up in Brandon, which is wonderful. In fact, it kind of started with us. I was kicking up a fuss. We had 3 people who needed a place to live. All their placements broke down. They had funding, but they couldn't go there. We all went out to Brandon en masse, met the adjuster, the case manager from MPI, and a wonderful OT from Block Building Therapies, and we looked at options. Nobody could afford to buy a wheelchair accessible house that was there. Nobody could afford to run it. The money was there, but couldn't put it together. So in stepped MPI, who said we're going to do a pilot project, and they built a 4-bed home in Brandon. It's state of the art. There's 4 very injured individuals living there still, 6 years later. It took us 4 years to get there. One of our first admissions is there. And it is a wonderful program and a terrific model. Of course, it's expensive. And they were all like very young. No way could they go to a nursing home or personal care home, pardon me. Okay, and Transitional Living Center, many of you know about that. 3 people live there, have been discharged there from our program. They have many more. It's run by a man named Gord Soanes, and he was my mentor for a number of years in the private sector at Neuro Recovery Services. There is nobody in this province who knows more about residential and community reintegration supports than Gord Soanes. Nobody. And any task force or group that is going to look at options needs to include that program. But they work in another world. They work in the private sector. So they'll get their money from MPI, workers' compensation, and WRHA special contracts, which I know was set up by a wonderful woman, Sandy Lohan, a number of years ago. But it's not officially a health program. It's mainly to help people get out of the hospital. And TLC has done some wonderful work there. It's really a terrific model. Mental health residential care. Thompson ABI program. They have a 5-bed transitional residence like us. We've only had 2 people go there because of the location. And they transition out of there. Mental health res care. A lot of folks think that people with brain injury will go to res care, to mental health services. We've had 1, and only because he was under the public trustee. They do not have an Access 1 diagnosis. They cannot get access unless they're under a committeeship. And supportive housing. We've had 1 person get into supportive housing. It's sort of a niche market, a young man in supportive housing at Heritage House, Fred Douglas. Excellent program, actually, but he's quite a bit younger than everyone there. It's working okay. Okay, next. Long-term care. There's an assumption that everyone who comes to us is going to end up in long-term care, and there is some truth to the need for long-term care options. Action Marguerite has really been a major partner for us, and they've done, they have a young person's unit. The wait list is 2 years. We have a few people on their wait list. We've had 4 go there, and it works pretty well. They have a 9-bed ABI unit that they set up. Again, it was set up, I think, out of desperation. The staff there do their very best in a sort of a kind of a hallway area. They have rooms off to the side, very caring folks, but they take on folks with very significant disabilities, often have been in personal care homes for a long time, with lots of aggression. And we do lots of work with them, trying to partner, try and help them out. They help us out. We work really closely together, but it's not ideal, and everyone in the field knows that. We'd like to see more space and more young people's activities, et cetera. Then, of course, we've had 11 go to personal care homes, and the main purpose is to get them close to home. Okay. We had 5 go back to hospital. Brandon is actually a marvelous, the Prairie Mountain area does tend to send and take back. They work very hard to do that. And so sometimes it's difficult to place all the way from here. And 4 have done that. And 1 just got too sick and had to go back to hospital. So that's our data. So where do we go? Services in the community. These are all the different services. So when they say there's nothing but luck, that's not actually entirely true. Can everybody read that okay? Can you people in webcast land read that okay? Let you read about that for a second. I think we all know this. Home care carries the burden, the bulk of the people who went home. The problems that were listed at the beginning, the integration problems, down at the bottom, there's almost nothing. There's not a lot of counseling. There's not really OTPT speech services. Deer Lodge has their program, and sometimes you can get outpatient OTPT, but it's not a universal access. It certainly isn't something that people, when they leave hospital, expect. They always go, "You mean there's no public physio?" "Oh, I'm sorry." "What? You mean there's no?" "I'm sorry." "Can't they go to a group?" "Sorry." "But you can live with one of our doctors." "It's okay, it's okay. He's opened up his home." Our doctor always says, Dr. Pascal always says he's going to win the lottery and build a home for everybody because he is also distressed about the lack of community options. Quick note on support groups. I want to mention those in particular. Manitoba Brain Injury Association has been at this for a long time. Gladys Harabi is the executive director, was planning on coming today. She couldn't make it. She just texted me before this presentation. And they provide support groups to people who've survived brain injury, but most of our folks can't get there. They don't have the transportation. They may need someone to go with them. And Also, they don't have a lot of funding for robust programs. They end up as de facto advocates, and they do their very best. The Stroke Recovery Association, we've taken our folks to that when we had transportation on a regular basis. And when they moved to Winnipeg, they may join their programs. They've been a very good partner. But again, very limited funding, not a provincial focus, and they struggle to keep afloat, like all nonprofits do. And we'd like to make a special mention to March and Dimes. This is a NUPM. Can you see the NUPM here? Yeah. And he's our newest addition to the group of nonprofit community organizations. And so they run an aphasia camp. We've had people go to that once a year. And they're looking at a whole bunch of other programs and services that they're trying to generate. But again, it's a silo. So the next one. So this is the Manitoba landscape. Did you know that nobody actually keeps stats on brain injury in this province? Not consistently. Some use the DSM, some use the ICD-10. Coding is always a challenge. I called Sue Vochuk from long-term care a couple of years ago, and I said, hey, Sue, you got any data on this? And she said, are you kidding me? We don't have time to get data on this because it is so complex. So we'd like to start that process by using the simple definitions that are used in PANOCA, the TBI, NTBI, mild, moderate, and severe, and start a universal communication with other inpatient rehab. There is no plan. And there's a whole bunch of initials down here at the bottom. It's not something I can go into great detail because we're going to run out of time. But finances is a huge issue. Personal income as well as the cost of care. Many of our folks depend on employment income assistance. If they're 65, they may have retirement benefits. CTP disability, maybe you get $700 a month. What's that going to get you? It's going to get you a bump up to the EIA so that EIA will be able to have to pay for other things as well. So EIA is a big partner here. And private and compensation schemes. We have a lot of public partners for discharge, but again, they're sort of all over the map. I had the privilege of serving on the St. Amant board for 4 years, and those guys know reintegration. They could write a book on reintegration, how to make life work for you after having disability. But they could only take people who are injured before the age of 18 with an IQ of less than 70. Hopefully someday they'll be able to provide community-based services for people with brain injury. Of course, private partners for discharge. When I worked in the private sector for a number of years, get to know all those folks. They don't even know the public people. The silos are so separate, it's like a different planet. I did a presentation one time on, it's like a wormhole. You go from the private world, wormhole, into the public world. So I've been slipping back and forth between this wormhole for 20 years. And I tell you, there's benefits from both sides and lots of experience. And then, of course, community nonprofits, which again, it's not coordinated. Well-intentioned, wonderful programs. But again, we don't talk. Okay, next one. So what are we going to do about it? So I have a proposal here that I've been harassing both the NUPM and Reg and Gladys Raby. And I've taken a course at the Centre for Healthcare Innovation, which is a marvelous course. I highly recommend it. And the new catchphrase is patient engagement. And there is a reason for that. We can set up all the programs we like, but if it's not relevant to the individuals who need it, it's not going to work. So we've written a proposal, along with Dr. Stamberg, to develop a patient participation engagement program to develop priorities for workshop series to be held 2020 to 2022. This was a kernel of an idea that Reg and NUPM and our program came up with 2 years ago. We really haven't had time to do it. At the Centre for Healthcare Innovation, they have this program trying to encourage patient engagement at the beginning levels. So we're going to be having a committee of 16, 8 caregivers, 8 survivors, working together to identify what are the most important issues they see. Because I think I know, but I really don't. Invite the appropriate stakeholders to a series of workshops and develop opportunities for Manitoba research into best practices. We do not have Manitoba research. Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC all have some loose associations of brain injury services, correct? Yeah. We have some March of Dimes representatives from Sudbury and Ottawa here today, so I'm really pleased you're here. And you can give Anupam and all the rest of us lots of feedback on that. We have a long history with Ontario Brain Injury Association, which is, quite sophisticated in their abilities to do resource development and research and organization and networking and conferences. We have not got there. Saskatchewan has a partnered program with Saskatchewan Government Insurance that they did a number of years ago. MPI is not interested in that model, but it works really well there. Alberta has a series of things integrated into their health system, and BC has something else completely. They're all different. So I would challenge everyone in the field to look at how can we take best practices from across the country. We have an opportunity for change. So the action is come visit us. Get involved with the partners, the community partners, the inpatient rehabs. Try and find out what's going on. We want to look to survivors and families for answers and do local Manitoba research because we are different. We'd like to do an environmental scan from other provinces and develop interagency networks. And this is the beginning. That was my hidden agenda. And I just want to make an announcement. One of the people who was heavily involved in doing role mapping or identity remapping after brain injury was a guy named Mark Ivesliker. And if you've never seen it's hard to spell his name. I'm not even sure how to say it. I think it's Yvlisaker. I think he's out of England. He's passed away, unfortunately. Did some excellent work on surviving after brain injury and redoing your identity, which is what is needed. Tim Feeney worked with him as well for a long time and is the champion behind positive behavioral intervention strategies. They're coming in April, putting on a workshop that Nicole Beauchesne is running out of block building therapies at Victoria Inn. I'll send that information to you once I get the pamphlet. Reg, maybe you can distribute it. I highly recommend it. There is some swearing because in reality, people often have lots of language issues after brain injury. So anybody who's got a faint of heart of that, you may want to think twice, but he really knows his stuff. He's out of New York. Okay, so we want to move past our luck. So the next part is a discussion. These are the takeaways. Moderate to severe brain injury causes disabling conditions lifelong, but they're not sick. Which then prompts the healthcare system to say, why are they in the hospital? That's a good question. Remember the 3 R's. Hopefully in 30 years, after I'm way out of it, this book will be a little bit on rehab and a lot on reintegration. Community living, organizations like St. Amant, they really know what they're doing. We need to build on their capacity. Families and communities are still the main go-to, especially rural and on reserve. I'd like to mention that I've done quite a bit of work in First Nations, and there's a real move afoot to try and start to repatriate. Started with Jordan's Principle. Now there's lots of stuff in the news about it, and I've had the privilege of being to some of the reserves around trying to reintegrate people with brain injury to reserve. They want to, and they provide family support like nobody's business, but they really have almost nothing formal. Home care, main support agency, but was not designed for it. And there's many different services, but very limited coordination. So no one keeps numbers. Shared health is on the horizon. We're told we're going to be part of it. We don't know when. Of course, everyone's in transition. This is the opportunity to make those changes. So I'd like to introduce you to Lindsay and Nicole. Would you mind coming up? Lindsay Pettinger, occupational therapist in our program. And she worked at our transitional residence, 5-bed unit, helping people with brain injury discharge. And Nicole Verkine, occupational therapist. So I'd like to ask, do people have some questions that's prompted from this discussion or questions about role of OT? Yes.
The out-of-province discharges.
Pardon me?
You've noted that there was out-of-province discharges?
Yes. Yes, there was. Yes, I certainly can. 2 individuals went to BC because of family.
Okay.
That was complicated because you have to have 3 months. They have to be there 3 months before they get medical services. It's very complex. One went to Alberta. I actually got him on the plane and took him myself with the family. And 2 have gone to Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah, and 1 to Nunavut. Pardon me?
They go in Ontario.
One's gone to Kingston, and one's gone to, he came from Northern Ontario.
Ontario.
Yeah.
So
Come on up.
He came from reserve and he returned back to reserve. But he was in acute
I might need a
care
microphone.
at HSC, and so essentially what happened is he basically triaged over to us, but he discharged home to the place Ontario. So, you know, Bisno, that's brain injury program in
Thanks,
the
Assistant.
they were very helpful to us when we were discharging him at
Yeah,
Reno.
and the person went to Kingston because they have services.
So he went to the Kingston Hospital, is that where he went?
No, the town. His
Oh,
family,
the
the family moved back there. They were originally from there from years ago, but they moved there because they have services in Kingston.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you.
Other questions? Yep.
So, well, this is very validating because as someone who has tried, sorry. Thank you very much. It's very validating, all of this, as an occupational therapist who spent the last 30 years trying to find placement for clients with brain injury, both from hospital and now from community. So, of course, my self-serving question as a community-based OT right now is, do you take, like the program that you have, do you take referrals from community or people coming just from hospitals? That's the first part of the question.
That's a really good question. Our referral system is a little bit serendipitous. But yes, we've had people who refer. Definitely.
And then my second question, I just have one other question. I'm just wondering about the model that the OTs do use there, and I know I'm focused on the rehab, sorry, but I'm curious, are you like using a cognitive rehab model? Like, are you trying to, is it intense? Because there's no cognitive rehab treatment available that I'm aware of where someone can go and get the level of feedback they need to improve awareness. So is that actually something that your program is doing?
You want to answer?
Who wants it?
What's that?
Use the mic for the webcast feed.
I mean, yes, we do provide cognitive rehab. I guess, we do some groups and some things like that, but I guess it depends on the individual and kind of what their personal goals are and also what their current functioning is. And because it's hard to kind of have like a kind of same model for everyone because they're so different and like, I don't know, do you want to brain injury, everyone is so different. And we've got people who are very severe, and then, I mean, they're all moderate to severe, but, even their functioning still looks different. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
I don't know. I think that's most of it. But a big part again is what we talked about, like creating that new role, that new identity. So we'll work a little bit on the cognitive stuff. If that's not making big changes, then now what? Can they try something new? How do we modify the task? Can we adapt things and put the right supports in place so people are, as functional as they can be, have the best quality of life that they can? And that's kind of what moves on into this reintegration piece too, right? Now what? And how do we shift the focus more from rehab to where are you going to go? What are you going to do? What is meaningful? Those types of things too. So it's a combination of all kinds of different things and very much like individualized. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have enough rehabilitation staff to do a lot of one-to-one therapy. But one thing that we do that is really important and what we're very proud of is we lead with compassion. And a lot of our activities there are about engaging patients. And just to give you an example of some of the roles that people have left with. One fellow is now the dog park guy. He goes to the dog park every day with a worker and he greets dogs. He's needed love all his life. And he's got it. He's well known. It's pretty neat, actually. We have another fellow who became an assistant coach in a football program. Very injured, but he has worked super hard to get there. And he is known for helping preventing brain injuries. We have folks who became a cribbage tournament champion at the local Legion. And now he comes back once a week in our program to volunteer to play cribbage with our patients. Everybody's got different roles that they try and try on. But the cognitive rehab is a gap.
There's a question there.
Ah, thank you.
thank you for this. I appreciate particularly the comment about the need for data. And I wondered, this is a big, broader question, and this was just published in the Lancet last week, but it was a study coming out of UBC of 6 high-income countries that found that 50% of the homeless population have had a traumatic brain injury in
Not
particular, and a quarter of those had experienced moderate or severe injury. So, like, I can see how we might need to think about this in a local tracking, but also in big data, because that's pretty notable, right? In terms of, where people are going first, but like some of them remain precariously housed, some people end up in jails, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of big questions to open up here around
And nobody
reintegration.
tracks.
Yeah.
You're completely right. Nobody tracks it. And that is not surprising to us at all.
Okay.
And we've certainly seen lots of justice system involvement previous. And the thing about us, people are so severely injured, they become a different person when they're with us. We've had people who've been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, done jail time, was in a gang. And I had to do a forensic review on the file one time. I went, that's not the right guy. I've got the wrong file. This guy's the nicest guy you ever meet. He makes friends with everybody wherever he goes. So it's not all doom and gloom. People re-identify who they are. Come visit us. We run a Thanksgiving and an Easter dinner. These guys stay before every long weekend, and the patients and the staff make the meals. The patients make the meals with the staff, invite their families, and have a huge dinner the night before a long weekend. We did it during the last storm. Now, what kind of a place is that?
There's a question over there. There's a question over there. Ruth had a question.
Ruth?
Go ahead first. Whoever was there somebody else?
Hello, Ruth. Hi.
I didn't have a question.
Oh, you didn't?
Sorry.
I think we went to high school together. We did. This happens all the time. I know. I know these guys are laughing because I work with a lot of people whose kids I know went to school with their mothers. It's the weirdest thing. Anyway.
I'm just really just curious about the model of service.
Yeah.
So you have regulated healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
And so, are there support workers? Are there rehab workers? Like, what's the service look like? So the regulated healthcare professionals, they come up with the strategies, and do the support workers implement them? Or is there, an allocated number of hours specific for rehabilitation? What's that, how do you design that? What's that look like?
Darn good question. We live in a mental health hospital. We have psych nurses, RNs, and psychiatric nursing assistants.
Wow.
It's not ideal. We love them, but it's not
An
an ideal
expensive
model.
by the sounds of it.
But these guys will talk about the rehab questions. Who wants to take it?
What was the rehab question? Sorry.
About how do you implement the model for rehab with AIDS and et cetera? Like, how do we do that?
Oh, like, how do we determine when?
Well, I was
Sorry.
just curious, like, who is actually delivering the service at the end of the day, and what's that look like?
Okay.
Like, how many hours of your time would one person get per day, per week? And do you, I wasn't sure if you had support workers, are some of these people, do they have like personal support workers?
Yeah.
Do they support in delivering the service?
So we do a lot of
We gotta wrap
we do a lot of work with the like we call them patient areas, and so with the nurses and the psychiatric nursing assistants, because basically we'll go in and do the assessments and we kind of give our recommendations in terms of like they're more like ADLs and that sort of thing. We also have rehab assistants who we work very closely with, and so when we're doing our individual therapies with them or even group therapies, they're very well aware of kind of the patient's plans and they can carry them out too. In terms of how often we see patients, ideally we would like to see every patient 1 hour a day for each discipline, OT, PT, SLP. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work like that. We only have one physical therapist and one speech therapist for all 25 beds. So we would like to give patients a lot more than they realistically get. But, it depends on kind of what the patient's needs are too. I mean, if they're kind of active rehab, what we would say, then they're getting seen quite a bit more. If they're kind of waiting for placement, they've been at our center for 2 years, then, we kind of just have to look at our caseload that way and see what the patient needs are. But do you have anything
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we have to wrap it up, but
Yeah.
side door rehab, that's our other thing. We do side door rehab. Come see us, we'll tell you about side door rehab. Oh,
I just have one last question. So upon discharge, is there any kind of an outreach program where
Nothing.
area people follow?
Nothing. Nothing.
Well, on that note,
That's
we-
where the family is right. Good luck.
We have come to the end of our time, and I do want to thank Karen and her colleagues for coming here and giving us an overview of a presentation in an area that is that we need to work together. And this, you pointed out, there are sparks of good things happening.
Many.
And we'll work to make increase that cluster so that we can all do the things that need to be done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.